After months of military buildup and brinkmanship on Ukraine's border, Russia is ratcheting up pressure on its ex-Soviet neighbor, threatening to destabilize Europe and draw in the United States. Russia has been tightening its military grip around Ukraine since last year, amassing tens of thousands of soldiers, as well as equipment and artillery, on the country's doorstep. The aggression has sparked warnings from U.S. intelligence officials that a Russian invasion could be imminent. Origin of the conflict. While there had been tensions between Russia and Ukraine, a former Soviet republic, for a long time, the situation began getting out of control in early 2021. In January last year, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy urged U.S. President Joe Biden to let Ukraine join NATO. This angered Russia, which started sending troops near its Ukraine border for training exercises in spring last year and increased it during autumn. By December, the U.S. began hyping up the deployment of the Russian troops, and President Biden warned of severe sanctions if Russia invaded Ukraine. This is not the first time tensions between Russia and Ukraine has reached a boiling point. Russia had invaded Ukraine in 2014, when rebels backed by President Putin had seized large swathes of eastern Ukraine and have fought Ukraine's army since then. As a former Soviet republic, Ukraine has deep social and cultural ties with Russia, and Russian is widely spoken there, but ever since Russia invaded in 2014 those relations have frayed. Russia attacked Ukraine when its pro-Russian president was deposed in early 2014. The war in the east has since claimed more than 14,000 lives. Situation at the border. More than 150,000 Russian troops now encircle Ukraine on three sides, like a sickle, according to estimates from U.S. and Ukrainian intelligence officials. On February 21, Putin announced that Moscow would officially recognize the self-declared Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics in eastern Ukraine's Donbas region, ordering the deployment of Russian troops there in what could be the opening salvo to a broader military confrontation. As the situation on Ukraine's border has intensified, NATO has raised the readiness of its rapid response force, while member countries put troops on standby and deployed battalions, planes, and ships to the region. The U.S. ordered 3,000 additional soldiers to be deployed to Poland, bringing the total number of reinforcements sent to Europe in recent weeks to about 5,000. The U.S. says it has no intention of sending troops into Ukraine, which is not a NATO member. Putin's order to send troops to Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the deployment of troops to two breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine after recognizing them as independent on Monday, accelerating a crisis the West fears could unleash a major war. About 5 tanks were seen in a column on the edge of Donetsk and 2 more in another part of town, a Reuters reporter said. The measures were separate from sanctions the United States and its allies had prepared if Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, White House spokesperson Jen Psaki said. Britain, France, and Germany also agreed to respond to Russia's recognition of the breakaway regions with sanctions, and the White House said it would announce further measures. Why is recognition of rebel areas dangerous? Until now, these so-called People's Republics of Donetsk and Luhansk have been run by Russian proxies. By pouring Russian troops into an area witnessing hundreds of ceasefire violations every day, the risk of open war becomes far higher. The two rebel areas would have had special status within Ukraine under the Minsk peace accords, but Mr. Putin's move bars that from happening. What makes the situation more alarming is that the two rebel statelets do not just claim the limited territory they hold, they covet all of Ukraine's Donetsk and Luhansk regions. We recognized them, didn't we? And this means we recognized all of their founding documents, said the Russian leader. Russia has already prepared the ground for war, with false accusations that Ukraine committed genocide in the east. How far will Russia go? President Putin may stop at tearing up the peace accords in the east. He has in the past only spoken of military technical measures if he does not get what he wants, and Moscow previously insisted there is no Russian invasion. But the chances of a diplomatic solution do not look good, and the West fears he will go further. U.S. President Joe Biden has warned, We believe they will target Ukraine's capital Kiev, a city of 2.8 million innocent people. In theory, Russian forces could aim to sweep across Ukraine from the east, north and south and try to remove its democratically elected government. They could mobilize troops in Crimea, Belarus, and around Ukraine's eastern borders. What does Putin want? In a lengthy essay penned in July 2021, Putin referred to Russians and Ukrainians as one people, and suggested the West had corrupted Ukraine and yanked it out of Russia's orbit through a forced change of identity. That type of historical revisionism was on full display in Putin's emotional and grievance-packed address to the nation announcing his decision to recognize the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, while casting doubt on Ukraine's own sovereignty. In December, Putin presented the US and NATO with a list of security demands. Chief among them was a guarantee that Ukraine will never enter NATO and that the alliance rolls back its military footprint in Eastern and Central Europe, proposals that the US and its allies have repeatedly said are non-starters. Putin indicated he was not interested in lengthy negotiations on the topic. "It is you who must give us guarantees, and you must do it immediately, right now," he said at his annual news conference late last year. Are we deploying missiles near the US border? No, we are not. It is the United States that has come to our home with its missiles and is already standing at our doorstep. What is Ukraine's view? President Zelenskyy has repeatedly downplayed the danger of all-out war with Russia, noting that the threat has existed for years and that Ukraine is prepared for military aggression. There's a similar mood in Kiev, where Ukrainians have continued to go about their daily business, despite international warnings and as foreign governments withdraw their diplomatic staff from the capital. Ukraine's government insists that Moscow cannot prevent Kiev from building closer ties with NATO, or otherwise interfere in its domestic or foreign politics. Russia cannot stop Ukraine from getting closer with NATO, and has no right to have any say in relevant discussions, the Foreign Ministry said in a statement to CNN. Ukraine starts drafting reservists aged 18 to 60 after President's order. Ukraine on Wednesday has started conscripting reservists aged 18 to 60 following a decree by President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the armed forces said in a statement. Top U.S. military official Mark Milley said the scale of Russian forces would mean a horrific scenario with conflict in dense urban areas. Breaking off diplomatic ties with Russia. Ukraine may break off diplomatic relations with Russia after Moscow decided to recognize two breakaway regions of eastern Ukraine as independent, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said at a briefing on Tuesday. Speaking alongside his Estonian counterpart, Zelenskyy said he was weighing a request from his foreign ministry to break off ties. He also urged Ukraine's allies not to wait for a further escalation to impose sanctions, which he said should include shutting down the Russian-led Nord Stream 2 pipeline, awaiting approval to carry Russian gas under the Baltic Sea to Germany. As for martial law, this question is clear to us. We believe that there will be no war, there will be no powerful war against Ukraine, and there will be no wide escalation by the Russian Federation. If there is a wide escalation, then martial law will be introduced, he said. What has NATO said? NATO is a defensive alliance with an open-door policy to new members, and its 30 member states are adamant that will not change. Ukraine's president has called for clear, feasible timeframes to join NATO, but there is no prospect of it happening for a long time, as Germany's chancellor has made clear. The idea that any current NATO country would give up its membership is a non-starter. In President Putin's eyes, the West promised back in 1990 that NATO would expand not an inch to the east but did so anyway. NATO's Secretary General statement. I strongly condemn Russia's reckless and unprovoked attack on Ukraine, which puts at risk countless civilian lives. Once again, despite our repeated warnings and tireless efforts to engage in diplomacy, Russia has chosen the path of aggression against a sovereign and independent country. This is a grave breach of international law, and a serious threat to Euro-Atlantic security. I call on Russia to cease its military action immediately and respect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. NATO allies will meet to address the consequences of Russia's aggressive actions. We stand with the people of Ukraine at this terrible time. NATO will do all it takes to protect and defend all allies. Is there a diplomatic way out? Apparently not for the moment, as France and the US have cancelled planned talks with Russia's foreign minister. But both France and Germany say the possibility of dialogue is open. Any eventual deal would have to cover both the war in the East and arms control. Russia wanted all US nuclear arms barred from beyond their national territories. Russia had been positive towards a proposed transparency mechanism of mutual checks on missile bases, 2 in Russia, and 2 in Romania and Poland. Timeline of Ukraine-Russia crisis. Here's the timeline of the events so far. November 2021. Satellite imagery shows a new buildup of Russian troops on the border with Ukraine, and Kyiv says Moscow has mobilized 100,000 soldiers along with tanks and other military hardware. December 2021. U.S. President Joe Biden warns Russia of sweeping Western economic sanctions if it invades Ukraine. Russia presents detailed security demands to the West, including that NATO ceases all military activity in Eastern Europe and Ukraine and that the alliance never accept Ukraine or other former Soviet nations as members. January 2022. Biden reassures Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy that the U.S. will respond decisively if Russia invades Ukraine. NATO puts forces on standby and reinforces its military presence in Eastern Europe, with more ships and fighter jets. Some Western nations start evacuating non-essential embassy staff from Kyiv. The U.S. puts 8,500 troops on alert. Washington presents a written response to Russia's security demands, repeating a commitment to NATO's open-door policy while offering a principled and pragmatic evaluation of Moscow's concerns. Biden warns of a likely Russian invasion in February. China throws its political weight behind Russia and tells the U.S. that Moscow's legitimate security concerns should be taken seriously. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia's main security demands have not been addressed, but that Moscow is ready to keep talking. United States and Russia spar over the Ukraine crisis at a special closed session of the UN Security Council. February 2022. Putin denies planning an invasion and accuses the US of ignoring his country's security demands. French President Emmanuel Macron meets Putin for marathon talks in Moscow and tells reporters, Russia will not escalate the Ukraine crisis. UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss and Russian FM Sergei Lavrov hold fruitless talks. Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, says US intelligence shows a Russian invasion could begin within days, before the Beijing Olympics end on February 20th. Conclusion. Russia's incursions into Ukraine shattered any remaining illusions about order in post-Cold War Europe, leaving Ukraine and the West struggling to respond while Russia reveled in its fait accompli and started to come to grips with its isolation. What caused the conflict? The summary stresses that multiple factors interacted. From the outset, the actors' goals were incompatible, even if that was obscured by the euphoria that accompanied the fall of communism. Viewing the situation as one of conflicting goals in a classic security dilemma, not only revises our understanding of what happened, but changes our thinking on what the future might look like. While many choices could have been made differently, the grounds for conflict were deeply rooted, and the actors were much more constrained, both internationally and domestically, than the literature focused on blame would have us believe. The implication is that neither schemes to make Ukraine a neutral country nor waiting for Vladimir Putin to pass from the scene is likely to resolve the conflict.